The moment I opened my eyes, a man in dark uniform was crouched over me, holding something small and silver up to the air bent on my nightstand. He wasn't looking at me. He was staring at the device in his hand like it had just told him something terrible. "Sir." His voice was flat, controlled, the voice of someone trained not to panic. "Sir, can you hear me?" I tried to say yes. What came out was closer to a groan. "Don't move, we've got you." I turned my head, just barely, and that's when I saw the open window, the cold November air flooding in. Two more men in the hallway. One of them was on a radio, the other was holding a clear plastic bag, and inside the bag was the little white air purifier my son had given me for my birthday, the one that had been sitting on my nightstand for 4 months. The man with the silver device looked at his partner and said quietly, like he didn't want me to hear, "Same readings as the Tucson case." I didn't know what that meant. Not yet. "My name is Frank Hoover. I'm 71 years old. I spent 31 years as a civil engineer for the city of Portland, Oregon, designing bridges and drainage systems and all the unglamorous infrastructure that keeps a city from falling apart. I retired in 2019 with a decent pension, a paid-off house on Selwood Boulevard, and a plan to finally read all the books I'd been putting off since graduate school. I was not the kind of man who expected drama. I was the kind of man who made sure the load-bearing calculations were right so nobody got hurt. I believed in systems, in logic, in the idea that if you did things correctly and treated people fairly, things would generally work out. I was wrong about that last part. My wife Lorraine died in the spring of 2022. Pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to the end was 11 weeks. 11 weeks is not enough time to say everything you need to say to a person you've spent 43 years with. It's not enough time to figure out how to exist without them. I still reach for her in the morning sometimes, that first half second before I'm fully awake. And then I remember. My son Andrew and his wife came out from Sacramento for the funeral and stayed a week. Andrew is 44 now, though he looks older than that. He works in commercial real estate, does well, from what I can tell. His wife Claire is a quiet woman, always smiling in a way that doesn't quite reach her eyes. I never said that out loud to anyone. Lorraine never trusted her either, but she never said it out loud either. Some things you keep to yourself. After they left, the house got very quiet. I don't say that for sympathy. Quiet is different from lonely, and I had enough projects, enough walks, enough old colleagues to have coffee with that I managed. But a house that had 2 people in it for 4 decades has a way of reminding you constantly that it now has 1. Andrew started calling more after Lorraine passed. Once a week at first, then twice, then sometimes every other day. I was glad for it. I told myself I was glad for it. Last August, about 14 months ago now, he drove up to Portland for my 71st birthday. Just him, not Claire. Said she had a work thing. He brought a cake from the bakery on Division Street that Lorraine used to love, and I thought that was a kind thing to remember. We had dinner, watched the game, talked about nothing in particular. Before he left, he pulled a box out of his car. "Dad," he set it on the kitchen table, "I've been worried about you. The air quality in Portland gets terrible in wildfire season, and your lungs aren't what they were." That was true. I'd had some respiratory issues a few years back, nothing serious, but Andrew knew about it. It's an air purifier, top of the line. HEPA filter, ionizer, the whole thing. CAPA filter, ionizer, the whole thing. Claire picked it out. He paused. "It also monitors the air quality in real time and sends data to an app, so I can see if the particulate levels get bad at your place and call you." I looked at the box. Clean white packaging. Expensive looking. "Andrew, you didn't need to. I want to know you're okay, Dad." He looked at me then, and his eyes were wet. He'd always been a crier since he was small. "I can't lose you too. Not yet." I plugged the unit in that night. Set it on the nightstand where Lorraine's reading lamp used to be. It hummed quietly. The little display glowed blue in the dark. It seemed like a comfort. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked exactly how it worked, and what it monitored, and why an air quality reading needed to be transmitted in real time to a phone in Sacramento. But Andrew had always been good with technology, and I had never been particularly curious about things I couldn't see. If I could see it on a blueprint, I could understand it. The inside of an electronic device was not a blueprint, so I thanked him, and I went to sleep with the blue light glowing 3 feet from my head. The first month, nothing changed. September in Portland was smoky that year, like it always is now, and the purifier seemed to help. My breathing felt easier. I slept reasonably well. I told Andrew it was a good gift. October was when the headaches started. I'd never been prone to headaches. Lorraine used to get migraines, and I'd always been privately grateful I was spared that particular misery. But suddenly I was waking up at 4 in the morning with a pressure behind my eyes that felt like something was trying to push out through my skull. Not sharp, just relentless, like a fist squeezing slowly. I mentioned it to Andrew on one of our calls. He sounded concerned. Said the air quality app had been showing some elevated readings at my place. Said I should probably see my doctor. I went to see Dr. Albright, my GP, who I'd been going to for 12 years. He ran the usual blood work. Everything came back in normal range for a man my age. He told me to drink more water, cut back on screen time before bed, consider a sleep study if things didn't improve. I did all of that. The headaches didn't improve. November brought something new. My balance started going, not dramatically, not falling down in the street bad, not at first, just a slight unsteadiness when I got up too fast. A sense that the floor was slightly less reliable than it used to be. I knocked a coffee mug off the counter one morning and stood there staring at the pieces on the tile and couldn't quite remember reaching for it. Andrew called that same afternoon. "Dad, the app showed your indoor air readings spiked last night around 2 a.m. Were you up?" "Were you up?" I had been. Headache again. Walked to the kitchen for water. "You need to be more careful. Particulate levels that high aren't good for someone with your history." I told him I was fine. He told me maybe I should think about coming to Sacramento for a while. He and Claire had plenty of room. I said I'd think about it. I didn't want to think about it. Portland is my city. I built parts of it technically. My fingerprints are on 3 bridges over the Willamette. I wasn't about to leave because of headaches and a wobbly morning or two. That stubbornness probably kept me alive, though not in the way I expected. December, the memory started going. I want to describe this carefully because people throw around the word forgetful like it means leaving your keys on the counter. This was different. This was standing in the middle of my own living room and having absolutely no idea what I'd walked in there for, not just once but 4 or 5 times a day. This was calling my colleague Jim and then, while the phone was ringing, forgetting his name. This was reading a chapter of a book and then having zero recollection of a single thing that had happened in it. My father had Alzheimer's. Watched him for 6 years, from the first signs to the end. I knew what it looked like. I knew the specific terror of it, not the forgetting itself, but the watching yourself forget, the awareness that the person you've been for 7 decades is becoming unreliable. I called Andrew, told him what was happening. He didn't sound surprised. He sounded worried, in the careful, measured way a person sounds when they've been expecting bad news and it's finally arrived. He said he knew a specialist. Friend of Claire's, worked out of OHSU, excellent reputation. He could make a call. 2 weeks later, I drove across town to see the specialist. A man named Dr. Finch, mid-50s, pleasant enough, thorough. He ran me through cognitive assessments, balance tests, reflex checks, ordered an MRI. When I came back for results, he sat across from me with the same expression Dr. Prozac, Albright had used. Carefully calibrated concern. "Mr. Hoover, I want to be straightforward with you. The imaging shows some changes consistent with early neurological decline. Combined with your symptoms, the balance issues, the cognitive fog, the headaches, I think we're looking at early-stage neurodegeneration." I sat with that word for a moment. Are we talking about Alzheimer's? It's in the same family. There are different presentations. What I want to do is start you on a treatment protocol that can slow the progression. It won't reverse what's happened, but it can give you more time. He gave me a prescription. Small capsules, pale yellow. Take 2 in the morning with food, 1 at night. I filled it that day. I started taking them that evening. I am an engineer. I spent 31 years solving problems by understanding what caused them. I should have asked more questions. I should have asked for a second opinion. I should have thought harder about the coincidence of my symptoms, starting exactly when the purifier arrived, and my son knowing a specialist who happened to confirm exactly what Andrew had been gently suggesting for months. But I was scared. And when you're scared, sometimes the questions stop. I stayed with Andrew and Claire in Sacramento for 2 weeks in January. They were attentive in the way that should have felt loving, and instead felt clinical. Claire kept track of when I took my medication. Andrew walked me to the bathroom in the middle of the night, the one time I got up, which I had not asked him to do. They spoke to each other in the kitchen sometimes in voices too low to hear, and when I came in, the conversation would stop. I told myself I was being paranoid, old man living alone, starting to slip. Of course his mind would manufacture shadows. One night, around 2 in the morning, I woke up with a headache, worse than anything I'd had before. I made it to the bathroom and stood at the sink running cold water over my wrists, the way Lorraine used to tell me to do when I couldn't sleep. I looked at myself in the mirror. I looked wrong. Not old. Wrong. Not old. Wrong. Though I was certainly that. Wrong in the way a photograph looks wrong when the color balance is off. Grey at the edges. Like something was being slowly drained. I went back to Portland 2 days later, told Andrew I was feeling better and needed to get back to my routine. He hugged me at the door for a long time. I didn't know it would be the last time I hugged my son and meant it. February, I fell in the garage. Nothing broken, just my pride and a patch of skin on my elbow, but I lay there on the concrete for a minute before I could get up, and I thought, this is how it ends for people like me. Not all at once, a little bit at a time until one day there's not enough left. Then something happened that I still can't fully explain except as the kind of luck that doesn't feel like luck until later. My neighbor across the street, a retired firefighter named Roy, had taken to checking on me every couple of days since Lorraine passed. Brought me food sometimes, fixed a loose gutter last fall. Good man. The kind of man who sees something needs doing and does it without making it a whole thing. Roy came by on a Tuesday afternoon and found me sitting at the kitchen table, not quite sure what day it was. He didn't say anything alarming, just sat down across from me and asked if he could look around the house a little. Said he'd been reading about something and just wanted to check. I said fine. I wasn't in a state to argue. He walked through the room slowly, stopped in the bedroom, stood in front of the nightstand for a long time looking at the air purifier. Then he took out his phone and called someone. The men in dark uniforms arrived 40 minutes later. They were from the EPA's Regional Enforcement Office, it turned out. Roy had a contact there from his firefighting years, someone who investigated environmental hazards in residential structures. He'd called him 3 days earlier, after noticing I seemed to be declining fast. He'd described the purifier to his contact, and his contact had said bring someone to look at it. What they found was not a standard HEPA filter. The unit had been modified. Inside the housing, behind the legitimate filter components, was a secondary chamber containing a substance that the investigators later described as an ionized chemical compound designed for slow atmospheric dispersal. Colorless, odorless, undetectable without specialized equipment. Accumulated in lung tissue and the nervous system over weeks and months. Mimicked the symptoms of early-onset neurological disease. The pale yellow capsules from Dr. Finch were tested the same day. They were not the medication listed on the label. I read that report 3 times before I let myself understand what it said. Roy sat with me in my kitchen while I read it. He didn't say anything. Some things don't need words around them. The investigators asked me who had access to the purifier. I told them Andrew had given it to me, that he'd assembled it himself and plugged it in. I told them about Dr. Finch, how Andrew had arranged the referral, how Claire had monitored my medication schedule in Sacramento. I told them about the life insurance policy Lorraine and I had taken out in 2009, the one that named Andrew as beneficiary, the one worth $800,000 that I had not thought about in years. I told them about my house, paid off, assessed at $640,000 in the current Portland market, about my pension and retirement accounts, close to 700,000 total, also designated to Andrew. I watched the investigator write all of this down, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not grief exactly. More like the moment a structure fails. The sudden recognition that something you believed was solid was never solid at all. I called Andrew that evening. I kept my voice vague, confused, the way it had actually sounded for months. Told him I'd had a bad day. Said maybe he was right. Maybe I needed to think about coming to Sacramento after all. Said I was scared. He said all the right things. He said, "Of course, Dad, don't worry. We'll take care of everything. We'll set up the guest room. You'll be comfortable." His voice was warm and concerned, and I had known that voice for 44 years, and I still couldn't tell, even then, whether any of it was real. Claire got on the phone at the end. Said she was so relieved I'd come to my senses. Said she'd look into getting me set up with a local specialist in Sacramento, smooth the transition. I said that sounded wonderful. I hung up and sat in my kitchen for a long time. The purifier was gone by then. The investigators had taken it. The room was quiet. Just the refrigerator hum and the sound of rain on the window, which is its own kind of Portland constant. Then I called my attorney. Then I called a detective a former colleague of mine had used for a property dispute years back. Then I called the EPA investigator and gave him everything he needed to proceed. When Andrew and Claire arrived 2 weeks later, they pulled into my driveway to find 2 investigators from the EPA and a detective from the Portland Police Bureau standing on my porch. I watched from the living room window. Andrew got out of the car, still holding his phone, probably ready to call the moving company he'd apparently already researched, because they found it in the records later. Claire was carrying a binder. The investigators identified themselves. I watched Claire's face go still the way a pond goes still, right before the ice cracks. Andrew looked up and found my face in the window. I don't know what I expected to feel in that moment. I had spent 44 years loving that man. I held him in the hospital the day he was born. I coached his Little League team for 3 years, even though I didn't know anything about baseball. I drove 14 hours round trip when he graduated from college because his mother had the flu and couldn't make it, and I wasn't going to let him walk across that stage without at least one of us there. What I felt, looking at him through the glass, was a kind of terrible clarity, the same feeling you get when a calculation finally resolves and the answer is not what you wanted it to be. The investigation took most of the year. The evidence was not difficult to find once people started looking. Financial records showing Andrew had been quietly moving money in anticipation of inheritance. Emails between Andrew and a supplier of the modified unit, routed through a private server, but not routed carefully enough. Texts between Andrew and Claire about the timeline and whether Dr. Dutta, Finch's assessment, would hold up. Dr. Finch himself, it turned out, had done this before. He had 4 other patients whose cases were being reviewed. His license was suspended within 6 weeks of the investigation opening. He is facing separate criminal charges. At the trial, Claire's attorney argued that she'd been minimally involved, that Andrew was the architect of everything. The jury did not fully agree. Andrew received 22 years for attempted murder, conspiracy, and financial fraud. Claire received 9. Andrew's attorney will appeal. These things take time. I did not testify. My written statement was submitted instead. I was told this was unusual but permitted. I could not sit in that courtroom and look at my son for hours and days and maintain whatever I was maintaining. Some limits are real. After the sentencing, I sold the house on Selwood Boulevard. I want to be clear about why. It was not running away. It was the same logic I applied to structural engineering. When a foundation has been compromised, you don't try to build on it. You clear it and start from a sound base. I bought a smaller house in Bend on the eastern side of the Cascades, where the air is dry and clear and the light is different than on the coast. Roy came to help me move. He drove a truck and I drove my car, and we met at the new place and spent 2 days getting me set up. His wife sent a casserole. That casserole was the best thing I'd eaten in a year, and I told her so. My neurologist, a real one this time, someone I found myself and vetted with 2 colleagues, says the damage from the compound is not permanent. My balance has largely returned. The cognitive fog has lifted. I take a walk every morning along the Deschutes River, about 3 miles, and by the time I get back my head is clear, and I'm hungry for breakfast, which is a thing I thought I might not get back. I think about Andrew. I won't pretend otherwise. I think about him the way you think about a house fire. The destruction is real. The things lost are really lost. And somewhere underneath the grief and the rage, there's still a memory of what it looked like before. That can't be undone either. I don't know why he did it. That's the thing nobody tells you. In the books and the movies, there's always a clear reason. A bad childhood, a formative wound, a moment that explains everything. I had a good marriage. I was present. I coached the baseball. I drove 14 hours. I don't know where I failed him, or if I failed him, or if some people just become who they become, regardless of what you do. What I know is that I am here. It's March now. The snow is melting off the Cascades, and there's a red-tailed hawk that sits on the fence post at the end of my yard most mornings. I've been reading again. Finished 4 books in the last 6 weeks, actually retain them. Yesterday I called Jim, remembered his name before the phone even started ringing, and we talked for an hour about nothing in particular, which was everything. There's a woman in my neighborhood named Beverly. Moved here from Minnesota after her husband passed 3 years ago. We met at a lecture at the library last month. One of those evening things about local geology that I went to mostly for something to do and turned out to be genuinely interesting. She grew up on a farm. She has opinions about the best way to make pie crust, and she's not shy about sharing them. We've had coffee twice. I'm not sure what it is or whether it's anything, but I look forward to the third time, and that's more than I've looked forward to something in a while. My health is being monitored by doctors I chose. My finances are being managed by an attorney I chose. My house was chosen by me, for reasons that make sense to me. I trust the lock on my door and the filter in my kitchen sink and the food in my refrigerator. These are things I had stopped being able to say. If you're watching this, I want you to be careful. Not paranoid, careful. Know what's in your house. Know who arranged for it to be there and why. Know your doctor's names before someone else books an appointment for you. Know your financial accounts. Know your documents. These are not dramatic things. They are the load-bearing walls. Check them. And if someone you love is declining, if you have a parent or a neighbor or a friend whose mind seems to be going faster than it should, whose balance is off, who seem somehow less than they were, don't just accept the easy explanation. Ask the next question, and the one after that. Roy asked the next question. And I am alive to be annoyed about my neighbor's leaf blower, and grateful for Beverly's opinions on pie crust, and able to see the hawk on the fence post in the March morning light. My name is Frank Hoover. I am 71 years old. I'm a retired civil engineer, a widower, a grandfather of 2 kids in Sacramento. I write letters to and will not stop writing letters to, because they did not choose this and they deserve to know that someone is still here who loves them without agenda. I'm still here. That matters. I'm going to act like it does. I've thought a lot about cause and effect since all of this happened. It's the kind of thing an engineer can't stop doing. You trace the line backward from the failure point and you find, if you're honest, that nothing happened without a reason. Every crack has a source. Andrew didn't wake up one morning and decide to become someone who would slowly poison his father. That's not how people work. What happened was smaller than that, and in some ways more frightening. A choice here, a convenience there, a willingness to let something wrong go unchallenged because challenging it would cost something, and then another choice built on top of the first one, and then Claire, and then the device, and then the doctor who had done it before me, which means I was not the first, which means somewhere along the line, a dozen smaller decisions made that possible. I'm not absolved of all of it. That's the honest part. I worked a lot when Andrew was young. I was present, but not always paying attention. I taught him that competence was the highest virtue, could do the job, showed up, handled things, but I'm not sure I taught him enough about what you do when competence runs out. When the math doesn't balance, when you want something you can't have, and the question becomes what kind of person you're willing to be about it. He made his answer. I have to live with what that means. What I know is that intelligence without integrity is just a more efficient way to cause harm. Roy is not a complicated man. He is not a man with an advanced degree or a finance career, or the kind of confidence that comes from never having been told no. He is a man who noticed something was wrong with his neighbor, asked the next question, and made a phone call. That is what saved my life. Not cleverness, not resources, attention, and the willingness to act on it. I think about that every morning on my walk. The world asks us to be impressive, to have credentials and portfolios and the right connections, and those things are not nothing, but Roy had none of them. And here's the reason I am standing at the river watching the light come up. Integrity is a daily practice. It's noticing, it's asking, it's doing the small inconvenient thing because it's right, without being asked, without an audience. The other thing I carry is this: resilience is not the absence of damage. I was damaged. The compound did real things to my body. The betrayal did real things that don't show up on any scan. I am not the same man I was before August of last year, but I am a functioning man. A man who reads and walks and writes letters and looks forward to coffee with Beverly. Getting back to that was not passive. It required deciding, on days when it did not feel possible, to do the next small thing anyway. Walk to the end of the street. Make breakfast. Call Jim. One thing and then the next. That's not inspiration. That's just what surviving actually looks like from the inside. Quiet, incremental, and mostly unremarkable to anyone watching. I am still here, and I'm paying attention now.